Jerseys of Hope is a nonprofit committed to inspiring a sense of community and well-being in hospitals through the donation of athletic jerseys to be worn by patients rooting for their favorite team. In the past 7 years, Jerseys of Hope has given out over 2,000 jerseys to lift the spirits of hospital patients. They have impacted the needy in 4 countries and 11 states. Please visit jerseysofhope.org to learn more. We're so honored to partner with Jerseys of Hope and be a small part of the large impact they make.
Hey everyone, this is Caitlin again. Welcome to the Aaron Unscripted podcast with my Uncle Aaron. Unscripted welcomes you each episode from our Jerseys of Hope studios in Columbus, Ohio. You can find out more about them at jerseysofhope.org. Our new song intro is called Stand on Your Promises by our dear friend and recording artist Kate Stanford, written and performed by Kate Stanford, Jamie Jamgutane, and Sam Hart, produced by Sam Hart. You can find Kate on all streaming platforms or katestanfordmusic.com. For now, here's my Uncle Aaron with today's episode.
All right, everybody, welcome back to my studios in Hilliard, Ohio, my Jerseys of Hope studios. I haven't been this nervous for an interview in a while, and it's really weird because I really don't get nervous very often, but I'm nervous today. I'm not going to lie. It's a pretty big day in our house because my daughter attends Liberty, and my guest is a big influence in her life, whether he knows it or not. So, Josh, can you introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, that's so kind of you, Aaron. My name is Josh Rutledge. I have the privilege of serving as the Vice President of Spiritual Development for Liberty University. Privilege of getting to play a small part in just the spiritual formation and development of people like your daughter, who I don't think I've had the privilege to get to meet yet. But when you reached out last or a couple months back and just shared a little bit about her experience here, yeah, that's incredibly encouraging to just hear what is happening in the lives of people like her and other students that are here on this campus. It's a special place. So thanks for having me on to talk a little bit.
Well, the beauty is that it's not just her, because her dad might log into Convocation every now and then. And we're going to talk actually twice a week. Her dad, me, logs into Convocation and listens and is moved by I'm moved every week to know that my daughter and so many other students are sitting and getting teaching that is just absolutely incredible. The guests that you guys have. So we have a lot to unpack today. And we're going to talk about one specifically where I became familiar with you and said, I just need to speak to this guy because the interview that you did with Johnny Erickson Tida. I want to get into that, but not yet because I have some praise for you real quick. Okay. As I said, I've got insiders at Liberty. And so there's a few quotes. First of all, I've been told that the nights that you lead campus community are don't miss nights. That's just one quote I've heard. He said that he speaks in an understandable way. He's well spoken. He's not afraid to dive deep, and he doesn't tiptoe around the truth. And I might have also heard that you're not afraid to step on toes, which is a great thing. So those are all pretty big things. I mean, what do you think when you hear that from the student body?
Well, first off, I think every campus community is a don't miss night. Truly, I think it's a privilege the nights that I get the chance to speak. But I'm there every Wednesday night, regardless, obviously, of whether I'm up there or not, because I think we're really blessed as a campus with some folks who can really unpack and who are just used by God in incredible ways on Wednesday night. Yeah, obviously, it's such an honor to hear from students, in any role that I can play in this, but I truly am those are kind words, but I'm just one part of this larger whole, a whole lot of people that wake up every day and think about those students. One student last semester told me that I was based and I didn't know what that meant. So I didn't know if he was criticizing me or complimenting me. So then I looked it up and I realized, okay, I think that's a compliment. And so now I've tried to add that into my Gen Z lexicon, if you will. So I think I understand it now, but yeah.
Well, I might be showing my age. Is there an Urban Dictionary? Is it, they still call it the Urban Dictionary where words like based are captured?
I think so. You got to be careful with that one. You don't know what you're rolling into.
Exactly.
But I heard it in another context and realized, okay, I think it's a compliment. I think it means like somebody who's, well, this is going to be my own, like maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. But as far as I could gather, it was somebody who's like authentic and isn't afraid to just speak the truth regardless of whether it's popular or not. So I'll take it.
We're going to run with that. Even if it's not true, we're going to run with that because I have evidence. I already told you before you even told me that. I already have the evidence. I got receipts for the fact that students believe that as well. So
I paid each of those students,
my friend.
I gave each of those students a gift card to send you that information. So
And so, okay, so we've covered based, which is fantastic. When you speak to students, and I might have been watching one right before we got on, and I just appreciate it. I can see why it is connecting with students. When you're speaking to students, do you feel like you're speaking to your younger self?
Yes and no. Yes, to the extent that I know what it's like for a lot of our students, not all. For a lot of our students, though, they grew up in the church or have, like in your case, like a family context where, I have no doubt that your daughter has been receiving like a level of intentionality and development, like from parents who love her and a support system long before she shows up to ours. And that was true of me too. So I know what it's like to sit there and go, it's not like this is the first time I've heard this. So I do think I'm speaking to myself from that standpoint as somebody who, by the time I got to college, I was well versed in the Bible. I had grown up in the church and those sort of things, but that didn't necessarily mean that I was thriving in my own walk with Christ. I think, as you're probably aware, it's possible to have all those benefits, and yet until somebody, and a lot of times it does happen in college, until they make that like step for themselves in some respect, then sometimes it can almost become a hindrance to their own. They're just leaning back on, I know all that, but they haven't really leaned into it themselves. So I'm always cognizant of that when I'm speaking to students, that as there's someone in the room that thinks they've got it all sort of figured out. That was kind of me. But from another perspective, no, because I think the students that are part of this generation are so different than even I'm 37 years old. So it wasn't that long ago that I was in their spot, but it might as well be, a larger gap just because of how different I think the generations are, because of what their experience. Some of it's related to technology. So I didn't grow up, with a phone, an iPhone. I didn't grow up I remember as a kid getting the first time I heard dial-up internet, it's like, oh, wow. So that has changed the nature of development and formation for students. So I think when I speak to students, I certainly know I'm not talking to just the younger version of me, because their experience is so drastically different of what it looked like for them to be a teenager and now as a college student than it was for me.
No doubt at all. And so I want to say this too. I graduated from Mount Vernon Nazarene College. So a little shout out to Mount Vernon Nazarene, now university. It was college when I was there. My middle daughter goes to Grace. My son actually attended Mount Vernon Nazarene, and then my daughter attends Liberty. And so to your point, I think it is, just because you attend a Christian university, let's call it, doesn't mean that and your parents, you grew up in the church. So that's my story. I grew up in the church, just like so many probably grew up in the church, was in the church every time the doors were open, but I wasn't living a Christian life. And so until I got to college and had to really flush that out on my own. And that's so many people's story, I think. And so I appreciate what you said, because I do have 3 that all attended Christian universities, but what I've seen in them is, and I don't know what they're learning in class, whether it's accounting or whatever they're learning in their degrees in, that's awesome. But for me as their dad and hopefully the spiritual leader of our home, it would be that they are grasping their faith. And I can tell you in my daughter's freshman year, she has grown beyond belief at Liberty.
Yeah.
And for that, I don't know what she learns in the classroom, but for that aspect, it's invaluable.
Yeah. Well, just to brag on Liberty in that respect, I think the reason that's not an atypical story, it's not everyone's story, like, because it's going to look different for people. But the reason I think that experience for your daughter is not atypical is I think there's a level of intentionality behind a student's development here. And the classroom plays a big part of it, because who's in the classroom matters a lot. We have a lot of professors here, and I'm sure your daughter could testify to this, that might be a math teacher, but they see themselves as more than just a math teacher too. Like, that might be someone who's doing, an intro to psychology course, but they see themselves as more than just that. So we have professors here who just care deeply about the spiritual well-being of the students on this campus. And then probably bigger than all that, I think, is just the overall intentional community that students are grafted into when they show up on this campus. So when your daughter came last fall, it wasn't as if somebody just asked her to belong in community. Like, she was assigned folks who it's like, that's your community group leader. That's a peer on your hall who you don't have to go out of your way to like find out, where do I belong? Maybe I'll meet some friends. It's like her first week here, somebody was knocking on the door going, "Hi, my name is whatever. Would you like to belong with us this Wednesday night?" In other words, you're not having to go by yourself on Wednesday night. We're going to be sitting there praying with you afterwards. So for many students, and I imagine this is your daughter's experience, all they have to do is say yes. Right? All they have to do is go. They don't have to go out of their way to find it. It's more of like, can you say yes to what's right in front of you? And if they do that, then all of a sudden they're going to meet like-minded people, peers who are also pursuing Jesus. And think about it, Aaron, like, what more do you want as a parent than to go meet your students or your daughter's friends and go, praise God, those are her friends, right? Like, it rises and falls on community, right? It does not matter how well, like, somebody gets up and communicates. That matters. But what's more important than that is who is around her. Like, and she's going to become like the people that she's around. And so if you can intentionally surround a young person with other people who they're not perfect, but at least they're swimming in the same direction. Mm-hmm. Like, golly, that just has the proof is in the pudding, if you will, of, yeah, that makes a big difference. Obviously there's, for every one of those cases, and it's not to slight, other universities or anything like that, but think of the stereotype now that is so present in our culture of somebody sending their son or their daughter off to school, and then their story is, what happened? Like, right. What happened to that little girl that I dropped off as an 18-year-old who now is a 20-year-old, like, thinks that I'm an enemy, doesn't want to talk. It's like, yeah, something happened there. It was called formation. Like, they became something else because they were in an environment that pulled them away from a good beginning that they had. And it's a really sad and tragic story, but I'm seeing it more and more parents, more than ever, I think parents, especially evangelical parents, aware that that's what's at stake. If you don't care about the things that you cared about, Aaron, then be careful, because you might wake up in 4 years and go, what happened to this person that I invested so much time and energy into? They're just running from God. How different the story can be to say, in your case, like, how encouraging that it's, oh, my daughter she's not running from, she's actually like growing toward. We're not just surviving, we're thriving. That's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And it's as evidence of the fact that, and I wish I knew the titles, probably makes me not the best dad, but she's evolving and to be one of those people that knocks on the door in that community that you guys have set up.
Exactly.
That's exactly what she is doing next year at Liberty.
Yeah, she's going to be a community group leader then, which is such the model. Like, the minute, if that's been done for you, then yeah, you better believe that we're going to turn around and recruit and say, hey, you go be that on behalf of somebody. And so, yeah, that's one, praise God that she's doing that, because I tell our student leaders all the time, we're only as good as them. Like, I can have influence in a student's life, but it's not nearly as much influence as the person on the hall can have in their life. Because
they're there 24/7, 365, right?
Oh, yeah,
and
exactly.
you can't be with every single student, because there's a lot of those, and that would be very difficult for you to do all that.
there's 15,000 students that go to Liberty. We operate at a scale that's really large. I tell our team a lot, we're far more like Costco than we are a bed and breakfast, right? And you just have to think that way. It doesn't mean that one model is better than another, but if you're going to be in a model that has 15,000, then if you're somebody like me, then you go, all right, well, I already start knowing I'm never going to even get the chance to shake the hand or meet the vast majority of people that are going to be influenced by this environment. Right. And so rather than even try to do that, you take advantage of the times you do. I hope I get the chance to meet your daughter. She should come up and say, hey, on a Wednesday night, I'd love to meet her. Well, but even then, it's not like I'm going to exist in her life as I'm not down there in the weeds with her on a week-to-week basis walking. So if you're going to be that, if you're going to operate at that scale, you better have a model that can account for her to where regardless of whether she ever got to meet me or meet the president or meet really any of the sort of public figures, it doesn't mean that she was not given the exact same level of opportunity and access to know Christ and grow in him. And that's where the model comes into play. And it's got to be bigger than just a personality, for example.
And I have to brag on her community, just to piggyback off what you said.
Yep.
I was there in March. I was on my way through campus. I was headed to Chapel Hill. Shout out Tar Heels. But I was there to see her and pick up my other daughter, who spent her spring break from Grace with Bryn at Liberty, just because she wanted to see her community, so to speak.
Yeah.
Before we were leaving, we were in that quad area, I believe it's called. What the large grassy knoll in the middle?
Yeah.
No campus terminology, but her community loved me as if I was her. They ran up and hugged, and it was just like, man, this is special. Again, as a dad of a daughter, and really any father, but especially girls, our daughters, when it was so hard to leave her 7 hours away. Yeah. One of the hardest drop-offs, and they've all been difficult, but that one was really hard because it was the furthest away. To know that she was loved and cared for by her peers. And so that leads me to the second thing. When I picked her up, they were all out there. And they were all around us, and they helped us load up. And, I just told them, thanks for loving my girl. Thank you for loving my girl, because we knew she was in great hands, not only at the university, but within that community that you talked about. Last thing I want to say on that is, you mentioned the other universities, and this is nothing bad about the other universities, but there's a lot of bad going on a lot of universities, as we know, just a few months ago. It would probably still be going on if they were still in session, because that's just where we're at in the world. It has nothing to do with the university. It has to do with the world, but not at Liberty. And in that exact same place that I got those hugs, you all had this huge worship night that she FaceTimed me during, and I got to be there FaceTime. Yeah. And I just can't get over how intentional and how special that is. When, to your point exactly, so many other places could potentially be producing so much other thing, and not Liberty. And so to know that she is not in a bubble, she's still in the world, that the world still evolves around everything that you all do. However, to know that she's in community, just like Christ intended for each one of us as parents, even. We need to be in community. We need to be in church. We need to, thank you for all of those things. I know that was a long-winded TED talk, but thank you for what you all do.
That's so kind of you. And it's a privilege to get to play a part. You're not wrong. I think God is not mocked. You reap what you sow. And that happens at an institutional level as well. And there's a lot of universities here in this country, and it played out on television and social media, where all of a sudden people go, what is happening in this other place? And it's like, well, look what's been in the soil. And so big surprise that's what's going. That last Wednesday night gathering she had, that she was a part of, your daughter, that was just the end of the year Wednesday night gathering. And I think that's what was special. People thought, there were some folks that I think thought we had planned some sort of big, and it was, no, that's just kind of what we do every Wednesday. The difference is we took it outside, We normally do it in the Vine Center, and it kind of caught this little viral trend of look at all these students outside. But the beauty of what happened that night is really that happens every week. It's just the environment changed on that last night. But Yeah, I agree with you. I think it requires a level of intention, and it's so much bigger than me, Aaron, because Liberty. The reason that I'm at Liberty is precisely because Liberty values it enough to actually staff for it, resource for it. In other words, it's really easy to just say oh yeah, we have this great spiritual life community, but then you sort of pop the proverbial hood and go, yeah, but you don't there's no funding for it. It's not reflected in your leadership. We're the kind of place where on Wednesday night at Campus Community, the president of the university is going to be there on a Wednesday night sitting right there with students, just as a participant, whether he's speaking or not. Our chancellor is going to be there on a Wednesday night. So in other words, if you've got that level of investment and support of, this isn't just oh yeah, those are the spiritual life folks, they do their thing over there. But if it's valued from the highest levels of the university, well, then that's going to send a message to students. And all of a sudden, somebody like your daughter is going to come in and go, I'm just going to jump into the current and just be taken this way. And the difference here is the current that I get into, yeah, what are we doing on Wednesday night? We're going to the big worship gathering out on the lawn, So.
Yeah. The guests you get for convocation are off the charts. I mean, it is a who's who of some of the most influential, and it covers a wide span.
Yep.
And what's ironic is I think there's been at least one that I actually have had on this guest, and that's not a brag. One guest that I had on this podcast, and I know the day that I saw he was speaking, I'm like, what? And so I'm texting my daughter. I'm like, he was on, and we talked about her turtle and that she has, and we had an amazing podcast that day. And I'm just blown away by, a few, Toby Mack, Sage Steele, Sadie Robertson. Jonathan Isaac, Tony Dungy. Do you realize my favorite book ever is Quiet Strength by Tony Dungy?
Love it.
I mean, that guy has just been such an influence on me, and I've been interviewing him forever. And then he comes to Liberty and speaks. I'm like, Brent, do you realize you get to sit at the feet and hear from people that I have chased for interviews because they've been an influence in my life?
Yep.
And now my daughter gets to hear from them. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. The one time, Shane and Shane. Well, what did they say before? They're like, oh, they're doing a concert next door, so they just asked if they could come over and lead worship.
Yeah.
And they just tore the roof off the place. It was like, what? This is not normal.
Yeah. Yeah, we are so blessed. And there's been a legacy, I think, here at Liberty of what you described, of the caliber of those kind of people coming in. I think you've had a couple of, actually, I think, because you had Carrie Job on your podcast.
Correct.
So she's another one that she was here it's been a couple of years since she was here, but she's been a frequent guest here at Liberty as well. But yeah, I think there's been a legacy of that. Liberty's convocation started off years ago where it wasn't all that different than, a lot of Christian universities, chapel or convo style things. But as Liberty's grown, that stage has just become, in some ways, this platform, if you will, with a wide reach of and really, because Liberty, I think, is representative of just sort of the evangelical as a whole, then I think many guests come in and it's like, all right, what is Jonathan Isaacs going to come and say, not just to a Liberty student, but also just there's going to be a lot of people that tune into that to go, oh, he's going to come talk about his faith. This is the platform to do that. So yeah, and it's a tremendous to steward it and just play a small role in trying to help ensure that the folks who get up and speak there, especially in today's day and age where it's, everything gets, captured and then everyone wants to create a viral moment and controversy and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, so there's a lot of prayer and discernment that goes into who is on that stage, and at the same time, not trying to get so narrow where we really, to your point, have this, the real aim is to have a pretty broad categorization of folks who, if our mission is to train champions for Christ, that doesn't just mean that we're training pastors, right? It means that in every walk of life, we're sending out champions of Christ, doctors, lawyers, nurses, on and on that list. So we try to put in front of students people who are modeling what it means in some respects as a champion for Christ in those respective fields, telling their stories, but also allowing for the fact that somebody might come in with just a different perspective that we might not necessarily share, but there's value in what they have to say And as a young person learning that, I think some of that's lost in higher education now, where people are pretty fearful of things that are hearing ideas and opinions they don't necessarily agree with. I tell our students, or I encourage our students often, that the goal is not for every convocation speaker to share something that you just check the box, oh, I agree with that. But for it to be something that in the context of this community, you can talk through and wrestle with and see a different viewpoint than maybe somebody else does. So yeah, but it's a joy to get to like steward in some ways that experience.
Towards the end of the year, we set up a shared notes folder on Apple, and we would share quotes, because we typically will actually, hopefully it's okay if she texts during convocation, but we would actually be sharing quotes throughout convocation, like we were sitting there next to one another, which just, thank God for that technology. That makes it very cool. And so I want to go to that, because how I became familiar with you, and I know we're going to run out of time soon, so I want to make sure I cover this. How I became familiar with you was an interview you did with someone from, I think, my time growing up.
Absolutely.
Her story, Joni Eareckson Tada, tragic and yet beautiful. Just an incredibly difficult story. 18 years old. I'm sure everybody's very familiar with her, but her life is incredible. Yeah. And that, as I sat watching it, I watched it twice. I cried both times when she talked about getting to heaven and laying on the sand, the warm sand. Man, that just rocked me both times. Yeah. It was just incredible. So what I did was I admired not only her, obviously incredible. I admired how you handled that interview. And the second time I watched it with my wife, I said, he's doing an amazing job. This is not an easy interview. You did an incredible job. And it wasn't like it was over edited. I have no idea what happened behind the scenes. As far as I know, nothing. It was straight, just you and her talking. And I just, want to tell you what an amazing job, whatever that means for me, you did. And number two, just ask, like, I have to feel like it was a difficult interview because there was some challenges, right?
Yeah. That was one of the more, well, let me just back up. First off, I had it as a dream of mine to have Joni Eareckson Tada come to Liberty. She's been before, but it had been many years, I think 14 years since she was here last. And so I had never had the chance to meet her or be in the room when she talked. I was super familiar with her story, but and it just had never worked out. And so finally, mainly because of her own sort of health, and she's gotten older, it's just a lot more challenging for her to travel. She's in California, so to get over here to the East Coast and Virginia was going to be too big. So that was a new concept where we threw it out there. And I really didn't know, Aaron, how it was going to go, because I thought, I don't know, can we hold students' attention with doing something that's not like in the room? Also, the thought was like, do we do it as like a live stream like this and do it? And so then finally when we decided, no, let's just try to go out there and capture it well and do it this, and then we'll just show it to students. And here's where it was difficult for me. I knew that she was this treasure chest of wisdom. In other words, and I knew that like all of that was in there. But you do this, all the time in terms of sitting across from doing an interview. Like so much of getting to that goodness is how good can you lead somebody to sort of open up and get to share. And so I was really nervous about, can I just get her to like talk about what I know is there, because I've read it, I've heard her speak about it. But you're also just walking into an environment where it's like, all right, it's 1:00. She rolls in. Hello, good to meet you. Let's get going. I honestly, I think it was I don't think it was so much me as much as I think something happened in that room where God really, I think, moved in such a way where we were able to get from 0 to 60 really fast in terms of some depth. And yeah, really funny story about that. It was pretty much as you saw it, like click, play, and go, except for there was one segment in the middle that we did have to edit. And here's why. I need to post this on, because it's a funny story that students don't know. We were in the middle of that interview, and there was a level 4.3, I think it was, earthquake in California. Like, it made national news. It was a pretty good earthquake. And it was in the middle of the interview, and stuff started like falling off the wall in her art studio. I had never experienced an earthquake of any magnitude, much less that one where it was, this is shaking. So, and they all knew, she and her team knew, this is not, they're pretty used to like the tremors that happen. But they shared like, no, that one's not normal. So we had to stop the interview because we almost had to evacuate and go to a safe place because they didn't know. They were waiting on they said if there was another one, then they would know this is a big one. But they also didn't know if like what we had felt had just been the aftershock of something much larger, but what we had felt was pretty big. So they thought, oh no, that could be that something's really bad somewhere else. It turned out to be like we were actually at the epicenter, and that was as bad as it was.
Oh, goodness.
But so that one kind of which it's funny now looking back on it now, because that mentally like threw everything for about 10 minutes.
Right. Yeah. And how do you come back from that?
Well, I will say we jump back in, and it's funny, like the first 5 minutes back from that, we ended up having to be, because she and I both were just completely like, just sort of jostled. And so that was the part that later there was nothing of substance said. I think at some point she even said like, let's these last 5 minutes need to go. So that was really the only real edit to it. But I'll tell you this, like when we showed it in the room, you could hear a pin drop. Mm-hmm. And so it was like such an affirmation that like, forget whether she's here in person or not. Like you looked around that room and students were they were all just locked in to that screen, more so than I think they would have been even if it was in. Like the medium of how we did the interviews really was powerful. And the other thing that I thought was a bit of a stretch that took it was just a risk was, and I told her this in advance, I said, I know this is crazy, but like, I don't want to just sort of recap your story. We can read about your story. I also don't want to even necessarily talk about the really good work you're doing in terms of advocacy. Like, it sounds so like almost blasphemous to say that to her. Like, but I want you to talk about suffering, and I want you to talk about what it means to follow Jesus through suffering. And there's just few, those people like that are such gifts to the rest of us in the church, because what God has asked them to bear, I think, has formed in them a level of Christ-likeness that is just something that they have been taken to a place where you go, you look a lot more like Jesus than I do. And it's not because like there's something special about you as much as like a very special God has done something in you. And because you've submitted to him through a lifetime of suffering, you just look that much more like him. And yeah, I think if you have somebody like that, and I think there's very few of those in the world today, I think she's one of them. And I really wanted our students to get to hear that. And I want our students to walk out of here and go, I'd rather be like Johnny Erickson Tata than what the world's holding up. And so I wanted to present her in a way that a student would go, whatever she's got, like, forget what I'm seeing on social. Like, I want that. And if that's coming even from the standpoint of like, yeah, but she's a quadriplegic, you want that? It's a bit of like, no, I don't want that, but I want who she is. And whatever it takes for me to get that, like, so yeah. And I think that came across thanks to her. She was so gracious in doing it for us.
I think you led her well as well. I mean, as you said, she's spoken her entire life now. Right. She's had that platform, but so to make it very, I don't even know if it's probably not the right word, but it was an intimate conversation. It was very special. I felt like we were just in the room while you two spoke. And that's why I said, I just have so much praise for how you did the interview. Obviously, as you said, I don't want to diminish her story or her. Mm-hmm. She obviously was the most important part, but it took leading, and I believe that she probably felt safe being able to go 0 to 60, as you said, and not just to answer questions. Yeah. You know, and you did a great job. And that's why I said, I got to interview that guy, because I have a feeling that story is pretty amazing. I didn't even know there was an earthquake in the middle. Yeah. So.
Well, and I appreciate you saying all that. It's funny how like some of the commentary afterwards it's been funny, like students were impacted, but it's funny how many folks I've heard from that are parents of students or even grandparents of students that they knew her, but it also had sort of in their minds been a minute. And then all of a sudden it was, God, I had an older gentleman, he must have been in his 70s, and he's a security guard. And I was at this event and he saw me, and I didn't know he was coming up to me. I was like, did I do something wrong? And he's this 70-year-old security guard that I'm at this event. And he comes up and says, hey, did you do the interview with Johnny at Liberty? It's like, yeah, like small world. And it's like, so it's funny how that interview actually ended up reaching people like that. And they remember her from back when they've grown up in some ways with her story, but to see it sort of captured. So that was a really neat thing that I didn't even anticipate of how it would be used to bless, folks who remember her story from years ago.
I think it speaks to her legacy, and I know we're running out of time. And what I want to say to you is I believe you're building a legacy as well. And that's not, I'm sure that's probably not your goal, is to be this huge legacy. Your goal is everything that you've told me throughout this interview, and that's to see students be champions for Christ. But I think in what you do and where you do it, you're building a legacy. And I can tell you, I have one in my home, currently home for summer break, that legacy is true. They honor you. They are excited to hear from you, and that speaks a lot to you. I know you and I've never met outside of this interview today, but I have no question I can say those things and feel confident that she's where she's supposed to be, and I believe you are where you're supposed to be and doing what you're supposed to be doing right now, and that means a lot. It really does.
So kind of you. Yeah, that's when you start talking legacy, those are big words, and I think they make more sense when they're applied to somebody like Johnny, who's able to see the picture of it, because they're able to look back and see what God has built through them. My prayer, Aaron, is when I see people like Johnny, and if a student is looking at me or somebody else here as, well, let me sort of imitate them. In my sense, it's more like, man, I want to be found faithful. That's the prayer. I don't know what that looks like, where God's going to sort of lead and pursue. My life is not my own. But what's asked of me is to be found faithful. And somebody like Johnny is somebody who it's like, I didn't ask for this life, but I've been faithful with what I've been given. And if a student could capture just that, man, that's legacy enough, right? Whether or not you end up on the convo stage, right, is so irrelevant. It's like the legacy of what God can do in the lives of men and women who simply say yes and are obedient to him, and obedient over a lifetime, has a ripple effect that you can trust to the goodness of a God who's going to through that reap a harvest for himself. That's a life worth pursuing. That's a life worth living. And I'm trying to do it. And I can't ask somebody else to do it if I don't try to do it myself. So that's my dream. And insofar as it has an impact and effect on those who are a couple steps behind me, praise God.
Love it. Where can people find you?
Liberty University. You can, this place and these students are where I pour out most of my sort of time and energy. I just recently, as a part of something our creative team was doing, have tried to let's call it relaunch some of my social media presence through Instagram and whatnot. But honestly, it's just a whole bunch of Liberty stuff. So
that's fine. Yeah. Okay. What is it on Instagram?
I think it's Josh Rutledge 87. Yeah.
There you go. Josh Rutledge 87. Man, this has been an honor. I know you got to go. I'm so thankful. And man, you have an open seat anytime you want to come back. I'm very, very honored to speak with you. And I think I have a lot more to learn from you. And I look forward to doing that, whether it's through convocation or stories from my daughter and her friends. Thank you for what you guys do. Thank you, your entire team, and everything that Liberty does.
Well, thank you for trusting Liberty with your daughter. That's not a small thing. And when you tell me about dropping her off 7 hours away from where you live. And there's something in me that I feel that weight, Aaron. I really do, of that's not a small thing. That's a soul and that's a life that you have given yourself to. And what a responsibility that is on myself and others to steward well the gift of what you're given to us. So thank you for trusting us with it. And so encouraging to hear what is happening in and through her, on this campus. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Well, my brother, I know you got to go. Thanks for everything. And I look forward to maybe shaking your hand someday when I'm on campus.
Love it. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem at all. Take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Unscripted Podcast. Make sure to review and share wherever you listen to your podcast. It really helps out our mission to encourage everyone to live life unscripted. Until next time, keep living life unscripted.